Hello. In 2008, Games Workshop published the very first RPG set in the 40k universe, Dark Heresy. But within a week of its phenomenal launch, the game was cancelled, the imprint was shut down, and the entire thing was licensed to Fantasy Flight Games instead. My guest today, Mike Mason, was leading Games Workshop's RPG publishing imprint during that turbulent time, and was part of the team that helped to bring Dark Heresy to life and helped to get it released. Before that, he worked in the events team for Games Workshop, and was responsible for many of their major Games Day events. He's perhaps more famous, though, for being Chaosium's creative director, in charge of the creation and entire range behind Call of Cthulhu's 7th edition. Mike and I spoke about his time with Games Workshop, the intricacies and challenges of running major events, and the sadly short-lived successes of Black Library's RPG imprint, Black Industries. And then we also talked about his journey to completely rewriting Call of Cthulhu and taking on the challenge of revolutionising Chaosium's most famous RPG. I'm Jordan, here's Martha, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with Mike Mason. Mike, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to take a look at some of your experiences in your career, especially with a focus on when you were working at Games Workshop and some of that stuff. I guess the best place to start, though, for me, is always how you got into gaming in the first place. What was your journey into tabletop gaming?
Hi, yeah. I guess it's similar to many people. I knew nothing about this gaming thing other than Monopoly and Cluedo and that kind of thing, which I did enjoy playing, but then I don't know, around about maybe 1979, maybe 1980, I'm never quite sure. I was invited to a friend's birthday party, and when I got there I realized it wasn't a party. It was basically four of us and my friend whose birthday it was, their older brother and their mate, sitting around the kitchen table with these funny little miniatures and these crazy looking dice and this game I'd never heard of and didn't know what the hell was going on, but it was bloody brilliant. I was completely captivated by the miniatures, which really kind of look cool, and they have the really old kind of first edition kind of bits of dungeon floor plans on bits of paper and card kind of thing. I just remember there being loads of skeletons. I mean, maybe it was just the only miniatures he had were skeletons, so they just stood in for anything we found. And obviously I didn't know what I was doing. I can't even remember what I played, but every now and again, roll this dice. Oh, you hit him. Oh, great, kind of thing. And it was just brilliant. I just really enjoyed it, and it was a completely new thing. So that was kind of my first taste, and thereafter I was like hooked about what is this game? I got to find out more, and managed to find a local game store, and went in, found a copy of White Dwarf, which was kind of your gateway into like this will explain everything to you kind of thing. And picked up a copy of the basic D&D box set, which would have been the purple box, as I called it, before the red box. And then got playing with my friends, and went from there. That was really how it all kicked off.
Right. Amazing. Yeah. I mean, D&D seems it's such a gateway for so many folks, isn't it? And just brings so many people to the table. Were you playing D&D primarily for a long time, or did you start exploring other systems and games?
I mean, at the time, it was all kind of one thing. It was like, it was D&D, but as soon as you could get a a copy of White Dwarf or go to a gaming store, you realize there was more than that. I mean, there was, there was like the big three of the time: Traveller, D&D, and RuneQuest. Seemed like they were like the big three, and then there's all these other things going on. So I did, D&D was the game that I kind of played initially, but it wasn't long before other friends were coming in. Oh, I've got this game called Traveller, let's give it a go, and RuneQuest. So we kind of decided to just play other things as well while also playing D&D kind of thing. We just kind of just became your classic kind of gamers in that sense of just we'll just play it, whatever the new shiny is, we'll go and give it a go, you know.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I remember with my gaming group, whenever anybody went into town on a Saturday, they'd always come back with a different role-playing game. Just
Yeah,
what, there was always something new that took people's
always something
fancy.
new. Yeah, yeah. And that, you know, and then I discovered Games Workshop, who had a store in the Broadmarsh Centre in Nottingham, which was a kind of a car journey, a bus ride from me. Um, and that was great because it was because obviously Games Workshop were very good at selling things to people and explaining things. So you could go in and you could actually have a conversation with somebody who kind of knew what these games were. And you could say, well, what's this thing called Empire the Petal Throne or whatever this is? And and it also kind of expanded it. And obviously Games Workshop was really great for miniatures, obviously, not, and I kind of definitely had a miniature habit in that way because they were the thing that really hooked me initially, and then so that kind of carried on, I guess.
Right. Yeah, great. Yeah, and there's so much to explore within the world, like Games Workshop's own worlds as they started to expand as well.
Well, sure, yeah, because then they had miniature ranges, but then obviously the first edition of Warhammer came out, which was like a big deal, I guess, certainly in
Sure.
England for us. So yeah.
Yeah. So when did it start becoming a sort of, potential career route? Like what were you at that time writing and designing, or was it just playing and there was kind of another career path that you were exploring?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, I know Games Workshop was in Nottingham, and but that was the only kind of, as far as I understood, English kind of bit of the games industry.
Hmm.
Everything was in America, and so it never crossed my mind that you could go and work in this industry. It just seemed so alien and far away and beyond, you know, what people like me did, really. So it was always a hobby. I mean, admittedly when starting playing D&D, it didn't take me long before I was designing dungeons and, like everyone does.
Hmm.
And But it was quite a long time, like everyone else, it was just my hobby and played all these different games with no thought to ever kind of pursuing it in a work sense. Um, it wasn't until it probably wasn't until the late 1990s when um, I kind of had developed a relationship with Chaosium because by then I'd kind of discovered Call of Cthulhu and
Hmm.
that had kind of become my favorite game. Um, and so I kind of had developed a bit of a relationship. Now, this to kind of give you background is my day job, my real job was working as a often like a marketing manager, events manager, and effectively like a project manager as well in a variety of different roles. So particularly within the marketing and event side of my work, I used to do a lot of copywriting, used to do a lot of sales brochures and information leaflets and advertising campaigns and all that kind of thing. So I guess in my day job, I was kind of developing my writing skills in that sense.
Right.
Um, and and so late 1990s, I kind of was talking to Chaosium and they offered me some freelance work, a bit of editing work for some books that were kind of based in England, basically. They just said, we need somebody who's English to kind of look at it because it's not been written by an English person
Right.
and just check they've got their facts right, basically. So I decided to do a little bit of freelance here and there for Chaosium. Um, and it was about that time I was looking for a new job. I was in a job I really didn't like. And I just was going through the job papers every day. And one day there was a job for Games Workshop, but it was for an events manager, which was what I was currently doing. It was literally what I did
Hmm.
was events. So I just thought, well, I'll apply for that one, like all the other jobs I'm applying for that day. I'll just send it off with my CV and not really think any more of it. I was really just interested in getting the job. It didn't
Hmm.
really matter who with.
Sure.
It was just wanted the job, really. Um, and so I was a little, I was a little surprised and pleased that GW came back and said, "Yeah, can come in for an interview." at the time I lived down in Milton Keynes, and so I kind of drove up, had this interview, and I was sort of sat with all these other candidates, and they were all showing me they'd bought like photos and brochures of their armies, their miniatures and collections. And I'm like, oh my God, I got none of that. I've got no chance of getting this job. I'm clearly not, I'm a gamer, but I am not, I mean, I'd stopped playing Warhammer by then, probably about for 10 years or more. So I was a
Right.
bit out of it, but I was there at the start, so I had that bit going for me. But but I had the interview, and basically, I didn't talk about miniatures, and I didn't talk about Warhammer, and I didn't talk about gaming. What I talked about was how to manage an event, which I think is what they were looking for, because
Sure.
they then offered me the job. Um, so I moved to London and started at GW. That was back in about 2001,
Right.
as their UK events manager, which was primarily the job was manage Games Day
Mm.
in Birmingham. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of how I kind of went from there to there. It was pure luck,
Sure.
really, pure luck that I saw the advert and saw it, and even then, I because I was an events manager, I was not a games designer. I didn't think. I mean, although I was technically in the games industry, I wasn't really. I was an events manager and
Sure.
working in the sales department. So it was. I still hadn't quite reached the dizzy heights of game design at that point.
Sure. I mean, that's fascinating. Yeah, just the right timing, the right experience. It sort of all comes together, as these things often do, isn't it? It's a series of coincidences that sort of work out. But then that's really interesting. Then, so like managing Games Day in the early 2000s, what was that job like? Were you spending all year sort of building up to
Pretty
the
much,
event?
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
you kind of finish one, and then you kind of have a month of kind of like not thinking about Games Day, but then a month later you would literally start planning the next year because it's such a huge event at the time. So I mean,
mm,
that I joined when it was at the NIA, the indoor arena in Birmingham,
right.
and it's just a massive logistical exercise, because it wasn't just getting some, getting retail stands there and product and that kind of thing. It was like they were moving like a massive plastic injection machine from Wisbech to Birmingham. This massive thing, which to me just looked like a massive danger risk because obviously all I could imagine was squirting red hot molten plastic across the floor and mute, injuring thousands of kids. It's like,
Sure. Yeah.
oh my God, you do that? Okay. So there was all that, and then obviously there was the whole kind of liaison with the retail team, which involved every store in the country, which was well over 100 at the time, all arranging to book coaches and sell tickets and bring coaches of people to Games Day, and then the organisation of all the actual the many hundreds of games that are on and who's
Mm,
doing what and where's it going to go and so you got all that logistical side, and then you got all the health and safety side about well, we need to make sure people can get in and out safely and there's no crush and all that. So it was a massive, and obviously it was a very much um a relationship exercise because obviously you were working. I guess one of the few people other than senior management who worked across the entirety of the
mm,
UK operation, including bits of Northern Europe as well, who were at the time based in the UK, but as well as all these weird bits, Forge World and Black Library, as well as the game studio, which obviously had very clear kind of ideas about what they wanted from the Games Day,
mm.
as well as the senior management who had also very clear ideas about what they wanted from a Games Day. And so it was a lot of, spend a lot of time just talking to people going, okay, so what do you want?
Mm.
What would what would you like to do? And then going away and working out whether they could do it or not. And then basically having to go back and go like, well, you can kind of do this, but not all of that. And this kind of ongoing negotiation to kind of get the best fit. So yeah, it was a year-long exercise. But obviously on top of that, I had other shows, and obviously GW when I joined hadn't yet opened Warhammer World. It was in the process of being about to happen, if you see what I mean.
Right.
And so there was a couple of old open days that were there before Warmer World that I kind of inherited, and then the whole Warmer World thing happened with the building the castle inside and the game store and all that. And of course, that kind of fell on my lap to kind of go, well, we need to run some events here, Mike. So okay, so right, we'll be running those as well. So we kind of had these smaller events through the year that kind of dotted through, and in the background, kind of underlying all of that was this kind of momentum, this kind of steamroller towards Games Day.
Right.
And and of course, I kind of made life hard for myself. We kind of, when I joined, I think we did a couple of years at the NIA in Birmingham. And then my proposal was to say, well, we've kind of outgrown that. And if you really want it to be a spectacle, then we really need to move it to the NEC. So we moved it to the year, moved it the year just before Lord of the Rings was launched,
Right.
because one of the first things we did at Games Day, we did this at the very end of the show, we had in the program, please stay. And at whatever it was, 4 o'clock, please come to the main arena for a special presentation. It was all top secret. And of course, everyone kind of fills all the seating in the arena. And then we'd worked on this video, which was on this massive screen, which was basically the first kind of reveal that we were kind of doing this Lord of the Rings game. And here's the miniatures. And so that was obviously a big deal.
I'll bet. Yeah. Amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
do you remember much of the scale of those earlier games days? So, like, was it like how many guests would there have been? How many members of staff would be working them?
Yeah, I mean, we used to divide the staff into different kind of units. There'd be like the retail staff from the retail chain who were there to run games.
Mm.
So that's that block there. There was the security team who were drawn from across HQ basically, from different people who basically just volunteered to go basically, steward and make sure people were in the right place and all that kind of thing. That was the other block. And then there was the other team, which were basically the sales team on the day. And of course, because all the actual real retail salespeople were running games and looking after their customers, we had to draw from head office. So we were drawing in a lot of the mail order personnel to actually run the actual retail stands on the
Right.
day. And obviously, there was always the joy of the kind of the inter kind of politics between mail order and retail, and who's selling what, and can we sell, why are we selling all these pre-releases? All this, we're going to take the sales away from the stores, and all this kind of shenanigans going on all the time. You're kind of having to kind of be the middleman in and try and keep both sides happy. But
Yeah.
it was I mean, probably around about, let's have a think, 100 to probably around about 200, 250 staff,
Right.
and any one games day. Yeah, that would sound about right. Yeah,
Right.
about
Yeah.
250 staff, I would say. Um, there was a lot going on. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And then how many like, visitors would be coming to the average game
Now
day?
you now you're testing me because I can't remember. I'm trying to think. 100. Yeah, so it's 1,000. Um, so we're probably talking somewhere around. In my head, I've got about 6 to 8,000
Right.
in my head. I mean,
Sure.
maybe more, but yeah, I can't remember. It was a
Sure.
lot.
Yeah, it's a huge event. I mean, you mentioned there as well about like, all the different almost views of what people wanted across the business, what they wanted out of Games Day. I mean, what was the kind of like mandate at that time? What was the reason for continuing with Games Day, given it was such a huge investment?
I mean, my bottom line with the event, with our chief accountant was break even.
Right.
As long as you break even, I'm happy. So that was kind of the bottom line. Obviously, I always tried to make a profit to be good, but that in terms of the financials, that was the line. But in terms of what everyone else wanted, it very much depended on who you're asking. Now, if you're asking senior management, literally the board, what they wanted was a showcase for GW for their investors to say, look at this, look at all these thousands of people playing, having a great time and spending money. why do you want to buy some more shares, sir? Kind of thing. So that was it was in one sense at the top end, it was a real showcase celebration to say this is a very vibrant business.
Mm.
Here you can see, you know. So to the other end where it was about the game studio kind of showcasing their talent and showcasing forthcoming product and kind of getting a chance to actually interact with the public in a sense, because obviously they were locked up in their little design rooms for most of the year. But also the other component, it was Golden Demon, obviously, because Golden Demon ran at Games Day on the day, and so that had a whole team of people just working on that, and the logistics of taking someone's prize miniature that spent all year painting and it not getting broken, destroyed, chipped, lost, and all the rest of it, and
Sure.
actually ending up in some display case somewhere. So that was a whole other side to it as well, and obviously that was a showcase. The people involved in Golden Demon, I mean, they couldn't care less about the rest of the show. Golden Demon was why they're there, and the staff working it were kind of pretty much like that too. It's like this is about elevating beyond products into an art form, and so that was pretty important too in that way. Everyone had their own agendas. Forge World had their own agenda that they were a growing business. It was the one of the very few times they would actually have direct sales with their customer base. They would meet their I guess what you might call their top customers who were like the big spenders,
Mm.
and it was a very important show for them because obviously they made considerable sales. Because that was one of the few times they were just available to buy, as it were, rather than having to mail order and all that kind of hassle. So.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and then they were, it was a fantastic. It was a showcase. It was during that era, something really special. How long were you running that in that role as running the game stage and the
So
event?
I ran it from 2001 through to about 2006. Yeah, about 5 years or so,
Right.
5, 6 years. And by the end of it, I'd kind of taken a little bit of a backseat because by that time I'd also inherited or took on the mantle of not only head of events but also head of community. So I was also managing the GW community team in terms of their outreach to schools and local clubs and
Right.
and all that kind of stuff as well. So I kind of had new staff come in on the event side to kind of take on a bit more of the day to day of the games day stuff. So I could spend my time across these avenues that I was working on. I was also part of the retail exec by the end of it as well, kind of working with the various heads of retail to kind of join in events and community and all these other good things. So they all kind of, in theory, worked together rather than against each other, which is
Sure.
often the case with a business. So
Sure. So then, at that point, is that when you jumped across into the sort of very different side of the business and the
yeah, I
the
mean,
creative
we
side?
we it was the whole there come the new year every year there would be the potential for a kind of some sort of night of the long knives where come the end of the financial before the end of the financial year there would often be some sort of staff culling
Right.
event happen, and so they'd geared up heavily for Lord of the Rings, and then that bubble kind of started to kind of diminish, and Judah was overstaffed. So there was a big kind of pull to kind of basically reduce excess staffing, not only across retail but across the whole business, basically.
Right.
So one of those areas that got completely destroyed basically was the community side, and so as part of that. I and quite a few other people in head office were basically, giving our marching orders, or we could see the writing was on the wall,
Mm.
and thought, well, unless we find ourselves to make ourselves useful elsewhere, we're probably out of a job. So, and again, luckily at that time, um, an internal vacancy was advertised for Black Industries Manager, which clearly was my secret sauce, what I really wanted to do anyway, which was actually managing GW's board games and RPG division, which was still relatively an infant. It'd only been going a handful of years, maybe 3, 4 years, no, maybe 3 years at most.
Right.
Um, and and so I applied for that. Now, again, it's how all these things you do in live help you in the future.
Sure.
So back in around the early 2000s, I put out a fanzine for Call of Cthulhu, which was called The Whisperer. And it was only like one issue a year, but it's quite a big A4 kind of thing. And it went from this kind of black and white kind of photocopy thing to a glossy colored thing over the course of 5 years.
Mm.
And so I'd done this fanzine thing, and I did it all on my own back and on my own time kind of thing. So when I applied for the job as Black Industries manager, Mark Gascoigne, who obviously was the manager of Black Industries and obviously the ultimate manager for Black Library, knew that. And so literally I walked in, he said, well, to be frank, Mike, you've got the job because you're the only candidate that's put out a fanzine. So, I clearly know you know what you're doing. So, I paraphrase, but
Sure.
so again, that helped because obviously I understood role playing games. I clearly had the gumption to actually make something happen. So, and obviously they were in a bit of a bind because work has started on Dark Heresy, the 40k RPG, but the two game designers that had started the project had now left the company, and so it was kind of languishing. And obviously, it had a release date set,
Sure.
so we kind of like, okay, we got not a finished book and a release date, basically 6 months later. Can you come in, manage everything else, but also finish that book and get it on deadline, get it out on deadline? So that was my challenge. And so yeah, so I joined Black Industries about 2007, and I had around about 6 months to get the book written,
Right.
laid out, and ready to go, basically. Which was, I guess, a bit of a baptism by fire.
Sure. Yeah.
I'd not made a core RPG rulebook before, so I was kind of learning as I go. But my co-writers had done a great job in terms of getting the book together, but there were gaps and there were things that needed ironing out and there were things that needed sorting. So I spent my time getting that done, and then many long days and nights with Mark, who was doing the layout, laying the book out and going through corrections in real time with him. um, and so we would have these days that would start around 9 a.m. and finish around 11 or 12 at night.
Wow.
Literally had kind of like 3 or 4 weeks of that as we got to the deadline, just to meet the deadline to get it as finished as we could. And so these really long days. And but we did it. We managed to get the book done by deadline, and which was good.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, but it was a hellish thing to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that sounds super intense. I mean, because Black Industries at that time was, like you said, it was covering all of the RPGs and board games, right? So they'd done a new edition of Talisman. There was a second edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay that was
Yeah,
still running. Uh,
yeah,
it seemed that the Games Workshop was continuing to invest in that space, right? And continuing to grow. I mean, even creating Dark Heresy in the first place, the first
yeah.
40k RPG.
Yeah, and there was a whole plan for the
Right.
RP for the 40k. There was three core games planned, that came out, Rogue Trader and then the Marine book. We're all in early development when
Right.
I started. So there was clearly a decision to, make a go of this. And one of the first things I did as well, it was apart from Heresy, was work on the first new expansion for Talisman at the time, which was the Reaper one with work with Alessio Carvatore and on getting that done. But yeah, so there was a definite sense of investment,
Mm.
um, but equally, we'd all been at GW long enough to know you can never take anything for granted. That
Right.
things change very quickly if the wind blows a different direction.
Right. Sure. Yeah, because Dark Heresy was really well received as well, was it? Did it sell out in like very quick
Yeah,
amount of
well,
time.
there's two kind of sellout marks. We did a limited edition of 200 copies, which were pre-released before the main book came out. So they were released in the December of December 2007, and we had 200 copies, which were all kind of these Uber exclusive bound. They came with signed. Each of them were assigned to a different inquisitor who had signed a certificate of ownership, um, and they went on sale in through Black Library's mail order team at 4 o'clock on that day, and 6 minutes later they'd all sold out. So it
Wow.
was, because one of the things if we are going to do a limited edition, I was very insistent it should be a limited edition, not 40,000 copies. It's not a limited edition. So yeah, we could have sold more probably, but I wanted to create an event that got people talking, like, oh, I didn't get one, did you get one? And that kind of seemed to do the trick, because then um, we we did an initial print run of about 30,000 copies of the core rulebook, and they were all pre-sold before the release date through our distribution networks. So effectively, on day of release in January 2008, in terms of our sales, we'd sold out.
Right.
So in terms of that, yeah, very very successful in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, do you remember much like internally at that time then? Like, because obviously that seems like, well, this is great. This is paid off in terms of the investment, the effort. But it was only within what, a week or
A
so?
week, literally, that was like the Monday, and by the Sunday of that week, Black Industries was no more.
Right. Right. I mean, that is wild to have had such a huge high followed by, the
Well,
lowest
yeah,
low.
yeah, it was definitely an interesting time, I think you'd call it.
Right.
I mean, it basically, as I say, the GW at times can make these decisions, and at the time, the board made the decision that GW was losing its focus on what was its core products, which were Warhammer and miniatures. And when I say Warhammer, I mean 40K, Warhammer Fantasy, and Lord of the Rings.
Right.
The tabletop war games and the miniatures were the core business, alongside Black Industries novelizations and alongside Forge World's kind of exclusive kind of resin stuff. That was, as far as they were concerned, that was the business model, and anything beyond that was a distraction.
Right.
So the entirety of Black Industries being board games and role-playing games. I mean, GW had already once kind of brushed them out of the building years before
Yeah.
in the Great Call back in the day, in the 90s. And it was kind of like a repeat of that since. And so basically, we went from a very successful launch and a whole product line ready to go, which obviously I've been working on all these new books that would follow the rule book, to you're out of a job. So
Mm.
that's kind of the highs and lows of the games industry, how it can be. And obviously you see this replicated these days, particularly in computer games, where you have a development team who work on a project, and then when the project's done, they're out of a job. They go and find another one. It's the cruel realities of the industry, I'm afraid. But yeah, so there were, and obviously what happened was that Fantasy Flight Games in the US had basically agreed to license basically the Black Industries business,
Mm.
basically. And they would continue with the board games and the Dark Heresy and so on. And so there was initially I had a little chat with some people at Fancy Flight about potentially uh, continuing to work, but they were very keen on me not doing it remotely, and that I would have to maybe move to Minnesota, which
Right.
really wasn't on the cards for me. I had a fairly young family, and it wasn't, given the vagaries of game design, as I've just said, I wasn't about to put it all in a risk that might last 12 months and no more. And so I just went, no, no, I'm not doing that. So I left the game industry for a while and went back, as I call it, into the real world, where I went back to being a marketing manager and project manager and that kind of thing. So
Right.
um, and then just kind of did it freelance, over that period, really.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean it's fascinating as well. Do you recall if the Fantasy Flight agreement existed before the announcement of the closure of Black Industries? Were you privy to that, or did it
No,
happen
I
afterwards?
was I wasn't privy. It was a this is what we're doing. But I think I mean obviously I think there had obviously been some ongoing discussion,
Yeah,
and but it was fairly need to know at that point, and I didn't need to know, I guess. So
sure. Yeah.
um, yeah.
Yeah. And they continued with all of those plans as well, it seems.
Yeah,
And
so I
sort of
mean, so the first, so in fact, I've still got copies of the Black Industries badged, Disciples of the Dark Gods, Purged the Unclean, and the Inquisitor's Handbook. In fact, Disciples, yeah, we'd we'd kind of had the first couple, Purged the Unclean and the Inquisitor's Handbook, kind of ready to go in terms of we had printed copies. We had proof copies here, which is why I've got them. But Disciples had not yet actually gone to print, so that was like in layout when the change happened. So technically, that was a book that myself and John French and Alan Bly had put together, and that was kind of the first release of Fantasy Flight. But obviously, that was under their badge, and then they basically rebadged all the books and then had the luxury of having some time to actually do some copy editing and correct some of the some of the mistakes, some of the typos that we'd missed in the rule book.
right.
And then then I believe they got Ross Watson in, who was an ex-GW store manager, I think, in the US, to
Sure.
basically look after the game line thereon for Fantasy Flight till Fantasy Flight ended the license with GW some years later.
Sure, yeah. And I think Ross had worked on the card games as well, of course, the
Yes.
Warcry and those, yeah. Do you, I mean, looking back on that, I guess frenetic sort of frenzied period of working on Dark Heresy. I mean, what are your sort of reflections on it as a game? Because it was really well received and it's quite well loved even today.
Yeah, I'm often surprised when at gaming shows someone will come up to me with a Dark Heresy rule book. Obviously, they get gold points if it's a Black Industries version rather than an FFG version for me to sign. And so I'm constantly surprised by that. And when they say to me, "Oh, it's their favorite game," or they are still playing it, that's very nice. It's a very very nice thing for them to say. Um, and so yeah, I mean, we put a lot of work into trying to make the game work. I mean, there are some little idiosyncratic kind of things that I would now 20 years later with some more design experience probably not do the same and probably would simplify and make a little bit more easier to digest. But at the time, given I'd never done really any proper game design before other than my own kind of stuff, I think we did a pretty good job. Yeah, and I think it stands up by the very fact that people are still playing it. And as I say, yeah, I would change most of it now, but back then, you got to go with what you know. So yeah, it's very nice to sort of see it still kind of talked about in a positive way. And obviously, the newer versions of that kind of 40k RPG, we've seen a few different iterations over the years, and they've all found their own little their fans and their their groups to play them, and that's great.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a very broad universe, 40k, so I think it can fit a number of things, as we see with Keyboard 7 these days, who are currently have the license and they're doing some really good stuff. They're doing some great kind of GW lines in that sense, not only with 40k but with the whole old world now for Warhammer and so on and so on. But it's nice to see because obviously running through all of GW stuff from the earliest days onwards, there's a certain English sensibility of humor that runs through it. Yeah, that if you kind of know, you know, but
Mm.
if you maybe English isn't your first language, or you know different kind of culture touchstones, you may not always readily see. So it's nice in a sense to sort of see that those range of games in kind of being developed and by Cubicle 7 who are using not only English writers but writers from around the world, but able to kind of bring a little bit of that old school kind of sensibility to it as well, which is nice to see. So
Sure, yeah, yeah. I mean, and we'll get into your sort of continuing journey into Call of Cthulhu, but you mentioned being a big fan, and that was one of your main games. Do you ever reflect on the sort of the relationship between Call of Cthulhu and 40K and Warhammer? You know, obviously
sure.
Wolfrup being influenced heavily by Call of Cthulhu as a game.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, naturally, as soon as I got involved in Dark Heresy, the dark alien gods of the cosmos were I clearly understood who they were, and and obviously it being a percentile-based system, which is the same as or very similar to Call of Cthulhu's BRP system, there was a natural kind of synergy, and I definitely made an effort to not do anything overt, but I certainly seem to remember every now and again trying to sneak in a little Easter egg that, only if you knew, you would know that, I was kind of like, trying to put a little joke in here or a little reference to something else. Which is what I think many game designers try and do most of the time, is try to hide little jokes in places. But yeah, no, definitely a synergy. And in fact, I mean, there's a going back before I worked for Black Industries on this, and when I was still back in the UK sales team at GW, it was announced internally that they were going to be doing this 40k RPG, and would anyone like to sign up to be a playtester? Of course, I'm like, yes, please. So I saw the very original kind of playtest documents for what would later be Dark Heresy, and they were nothing like what Dark Heresy would later be. In fact, I was somewhat shocked by them. Being an old school role player and kind of knowing my way around things, I kind of looked and went, "What the hell is this? This
Right.
this is not, one, it's not 40k, and two, why are you using this rule set that makes no sense? I mean, the rule set made sense, but why are you using this rule set when you've already got one?
Hmm.
As in, you've already got Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay with a percentile system that everyone understands. It's really intuitive. It's very quick to grasp. Why are you introducing a different mechanic, or basic kind of mechanic to the game? So I had a bit of a moan about that, and this, I don't know whether this down in the future this also helped me get the job, but I my old boss was now had moved across. Was now the overall boss of Black Library.
Hmm.
So because I knew him, I kind of had a bit of a moan to him about saying, tell me to shut up, but what about this, and this, and this, and this, and I bent his ear for a good hour about why this was wrong, and this was the direction was wrong,
Hmm.
and it needed to, why are we even letting these other people write it? Why don't we write it in house? In fact, and I mean, I'm not going to take credit for being the person that made this happen, but I certainly contributed to it. But and what happened was that the original design team were kind of let go in that sense, and people were recruited in-house or recruited to be in-house game designers for the game, and that's the team that kind of started Dark Heresy off, and basically using the basis of Warhammer 40k, no, of Warhammer roleplay,
Right.
the mechanics there as the basis for this 40k game, because then people already understood that. So yeah, so I guess I was kind of sticking knives in the early days to kind of try and help steer it in a different direction. So yeah.
Sure. So then, how did you come to be working on Call of Cthulhu itself? Like, what led you there?
Well, I mean, throughout all of this period, and for another kind of nearly 20 years before, I've been playing Call of Cthulhu as well as other role playing games, but Call of Cthulhu was my main game.
Hmm.
And so while I played a little less of it while I was working on 40K, because all my time was spent playtesting Dark Heresy and scenarios and all that kind of thing. Um, I was still involved, and of course, when I finished at GW and left and got a normal job, I kind of had all this available time for gaming, as it were, in the evenings. So I kind of restarted some old groups and would started playing Cthulhu again, which obviously inspired me to start developing and writing stuff for Cthulhu. Um, and at that time, I was running a kind of a convention group called the Cult of Keepers. So we were just a bunch of GMs who like Call of Cthulhu. We'd get together, we'd share some scenarios we'd written, and we'd go to different shows and run Call of Cthulhu. So we'd go to UK game, no, UK Gen Con at the time, and various other shows. And we just rock up, and we kind of got a bit of a name. People liked our games because they're a little bit different, and so through that, and through doing the fanzine and doing a little bit of editorial work every now and again for Chaosium, I kind of had a good relationship with the people that ran Chaosium in California. Um, and occasionally, the main guy at the time, Charlie Crank, would come across as a guest to some of the UK shows, and so I'd met him a number of times. We kind of knew each other. We'd kind of hung out, and it was all good. So what happened was myself and a friend of mine who was also one of the members of the Cult of Keepers, Paul Fricker, we'd been discussing how it was kind of time. We felt it was kind of time for a new edition of the game for Call of Cthulhu, because the previous edition had been out for years and years and years, and it was really a little clunky in places. And the rule book, if you opened it, was kind of pretty hard to navigate. It wasn't welcoming to a new player.
Right.
It was fine if you'd been playing for 20 years and you could kind of work out what to read and what not to read, but not really a very welcoming book for if you wanted to encourage new players to kind of pick the game up. And we were very much into that kind of idea of like trying to keep the game alive, because we were aware we were all getting older, and if it's only you stop playing it, then that game's going to die off pretty soon. So we were very keen to kind of like look at how we could kind of make some improvements and kind of reinvigorate the game in a sense. So and because I got this relationship, it allowed me to kind of basically approach Chaosium with Paul and say, we'd like to do a new edition. Are you interested? And we kind of expected that we were going to kind of go, well, maybe, maybe not, I don't know, and kind of and ah about it for a couple of years before anything happened. And in fact, what they just did immediately was, yes, please go away and write it. So, yeah, okay. So, in our own time, obviously, we both had other jobs. We then spent the next 4 years writing what would become the current edition of Call of Cthulhu. And then, presented that back to Chaosium, ran a big worldwide playtest. And then it was put on Kickstarter and did successfully on Kickstarter. And around at that time, the job I was doing then, because obviously been made redundant from GW, and then for another kind of whatever it was, 7 years, I'd worked for this other company in the world of training and vocational education. That company had been bought out, and the company that bought it out had basically decided to close it all down. It was like
Right.
one of the things. So I was being made redundant there as well. So I was so I was facing the fact that I need to find a job. And Chaosium turned around and said, "Well, it looks like you're available." I went, "Well, yeah." And then, would you like to, come on board as the line editor for Call of Cthulhu? As you've just written the game, it'd be kind of good if you were here to kind of, get it going and all that. So I said, "Well, yes, please, because I need a job." So I started there. When did I start there? About 2013. It's about 12 years ago. And started working at Chaosium, remotely, as we all do. Chaosium is a completely distributed kind of company in that way. So, and for 12 years, I've been working to kind of develop and broaden the appeal and get people playing Call of Cthulhu, basically.
That's incredible then. So was there no in-house like development team looking at new editions or like looking at the core
Well,
game?
it was a bit of a situation of circumstance because the line editor, the previous line editor to me was Lynn Willis, who was
Right.
been at Chaosium a long time and was a great guy. But unfortunately, he was getting not getting any younger, and as he got older, unfortunately, he had health complications and eventually died, kind of in post.
Right.
So there was a number of years, 2, 3, 4 years where technically there was no internal development team for any role playing at Chaosium.
Wow.
They'd kind of reached this kind of point where it was kind of trudging water. They didn't really have much money. They didn't really have much new product, and they were kind of you know existing through their mail order and licensing and all that kind of thing. And so it was a real, which I didn't really realize at the time till I kind of joined the company,
Hmm.
is one of the reasons why they wanted a new edition but they didn't have anyone to do it, or
Right.
they didn't have anyone that wanted to do it, I think is the way to say it.
Right.
Um, and so that's why they kind of jumped to this because it was a chance for them to kind of do something and have some people that had a clear passion for the game to come in and do something with it. Um, so yeah, so it all kind of these as these things work, they just kind of things fall into place in this kind of bizarre way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's incredible. And then so you and Paul were developing your version of the game, your edition. Were you doing, and that was all on spec then? So you like you weren't contracted, you were literally just in
No
your own
contract,
time.
no
Wow.
contract, no promise. Just go away and write it, and if we like it, we'll talk more.
I mean
So
that's
based,
what a gamble that you guys were
I
taking.
mean, we had, it was either that or not do anything at all. So we're like, well, let's just give it a go.
Yeah.
And the thing is, obviously, I'd already my experience was that I'd already produced a rule book, an old school style role play rule book that kind of worked across the board. So I had that production experience and that kind of editorial experience. Paul was kind of coming in with the experience of playing Call of Cthulhu and wanting to kind of develop his games development skills in that sense. So it was kind of good kind of combination.
Mm.
So Paul's the kind of guy that would say to me, "You need to tell me there's a deadline, otherwise I'm just going to spend all year doing it." So I'd be the kind of the project manager in that sense to kind of go, no, we've got to get this done now. Let's not faff around anymore. So we were kind of complemented each other in our kind of skill sets. Um, but yeah, it was just a case of again being in the right place at the right time. We just sitting there and go like, hey, would you like us to do this? And Kaz turned around, yes.
Yeah.
Um, so so I did that. We bought the game out and we were, so well, we hadn't quite bought the game out. It'd been kickstarted, and this is when Chaosium was sort of their financial difficulties kind of started coming to a head because they'd done a previous Kickstarter on the Orient Express
Mm.
box set game, and unfortunately the finances that they kind of mapped out didn't quite reflect the real world, as in they had underpriced the shipping costs, and so. It was they were losing money every day on that product even though it had been successfully kickstarted,
Mm.
and obviously that had a knock-on effect on the 7th edition production of those books because they didn't really have the money to pay the printer and get things going and all these kind of things happening. That was that kind of I was sat in England thinking didn't really know much about this. I was just, oh wait, we get this all done, and then I was why aren't the books printed yet? Kind of question in my head, and I'm not really getting answers. And that's the time when the company ownership changed at Chaosium because um, some of the original owners who still held shares in the company decided that things weren't going in the direction they wanted, and there were kind of the company was in kind of financial difficulty.
Mm.
So to kind of effectively save the company, they basically came back and reconvened the company in the fact that they took control and the existing management at the time was basically, ousted in that way, in a relatively nice way, but still ousted. And so Greg Stafford, who was the original founder of Chaosium, kind of came back as the key owner, and at that point, he then brought in the Moon Design team, who were a bunch of guys who had kind of, a bit like me, had a long relationship with Chaosium, but rather than Call of Cthulhu, their game was RuneQuest.
Right.
And so they came in and basically um, Greg sold the company to those guys because they were younger, they had some money to invest, and they were keen to do it. Um, so this kind of a whole kind of new management team came into Chaosium with bringing new investment, which allowed us to, get the Call of Cthulhu books printed and out to people's hands, and to start to actually, invest and develop the quality of the books as we go forward. And it's been an ongoing process over the last 12 years to build that quality and to grow the range and to grow our audience back up from a fairly small point at that time. It's fairly dark, I guess, fairly dark days back then. Some 18 to 12 years ago, it was occasion wasn't at its height, let's say. It was, but I'm pleased to kind of say that we seem to have kind of regained our footing and are back on a very good track now. It's been 12 years in the making, but we're there. It's going well.
Yeah, yeah. It's strange to think, isn't it? Because when you think about this with Call of Cthulhu as it is a cornerstone of the role playing market, right? It is role playing for a lot of people, and I mean the same is true of Warhammer, really, isn't it? There's these periods where these pillars of the hobby, then they're a bit more fragile sometimes than one might think, and there's the danger that that they might not always be there, which is quite surprising, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, you see it if you look across the entirety of the kind of the role-playing games industry from the 70s to now.
Mm,
I mean, there's a kind of a management rule or a kind of a warning that most companies don't live longer than 30 years, because that's when the original person that set them up, the original owner, kind of either dies, retires, moves on. And most companies don't tend to survive that.
mm,
And you can see with both GW and with Chaosium, there has been points where a radical decision has had to be made for the company to continue. And obviously, with GW, there was a radical decision of a management buyout
mm.
with Tom Kirby back in the day, and so on. And you've seen these various how our companies evolve. Now you look at other companies that have been around a long time but no longer here, such as Flying Buffalo, who were the company that released Tunnels and Trolls
Mm.
back in the day, and pretty successful. Never massive, but successful. They don't exist anymore.
Mm.
And because I know this because for many years they were slightly older than Chaosium, so they were the oldest role-playing company in the world for quite a while until they were no more. And so, as it stands, Chaosium is the oldest role-playing company in the
Right.
world because we just managed to kind of keep going longer than Blind Buffalo. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There are these times when um, decisions have to be made, whether it's, company direction, concentration on core product, management style, finances, all these different permutations
Mm.
can affect a company. And obviously the ones who survive are able to kind of negotiate that in some way and hopefully come out the other side of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you see that reinvention, but both at the company level and the game level. I mean, TSR being a good example as well, and
Yeah.
the sort of
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah.
number of iterations that they've been through over the years. I mean, it is, yeah, it's amazing, and to see the where Call of Cthulhu stands now, it is back on top. I think is fair to say, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's depending on which country you stand in.
Mm,
Definitely. I mean, obviously, in the US and kind of the English speaking world, D&D is clearly a market leader, and it was first to market. It's a market leader, and it's unlikely we will ever be bigger than D&D,
Sure.
but we are a healthy second place in a lot of cases. For instance, like on Roll20 on the online kind of gaming play, D&D is at top, and then there's a bit of a stretch between us, but
Sure.
Call of Cthulhu is second. So that's a good indicator. But obviously, we're still in Japan, where Call of Cthulhu was the first role-playing game to market there. Call of Cthulhu in Japan is as big as D&D anywhere else in the world, if you see what I mean. It is, when people think of role-playing, they think of Call of Cthulhu in Japan. And so it's a massive thing there. And so, so in that sense, as it all kind of balances out, it's, one of the things I guess I'm most kind of proud of is that kind of being able to kind of play a role in helping to kind of, re-energize the game. Because as I say, it back 14 years ago, it was not in a good place. Maybe one publication a year if you were lucky, probably not. Hardly anything coming out, and what was coming out was unedited. The artwork was very poor because they couldn't afford to buy relatively good quality artwork, and so it was it's on its last legs, to be honest. So being able to kind of play a role and work with the new management team to kind of put the investment in and the desire for better quality is it's been what's it's been a good thing in terms of for me. I feel I've helped to help the game in a little way, as we're all we're all only here for a while. Somebody else will in theory do what I do at some point in the future when I'm long gone, and and I can't see any reason why games like D&D and certainly Call of Cthulhu won't be around in another 50 years to 100 years, because they have this longevity. But now we've got past the kind of the initial hump of, hey, is role playing okay? Is it cool? We have discovered now, some 50 years after the invention of D&D, that actually it's cooler than ever, and that more and more people than ever play these games. That I think that's kind of helped to kind of hopefully secure this style of entertainment, this style of socialization, this time of just getting together with your mates, to kind of secure that for the future, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then it feels like there's a really bright future for a lot of different RPGs, but Call of Cthulhu in particular.
Yeah, no, absolutely, it's great. I mean, as we mentioned before we started, I just kind of came back from Gen Con in the US, and obviously there's all the big names and the usual kind of games you expect to see there. But what's always encouraging and always lovely to see are the new stuff, the new creators, the new kind of smaller companies who are just starting off, and the kind of independent creators. And they're all coming out with, either brand new ideas or reinventions of old ideas that they thought were new ideas, all these kind of cool things. But it's just great to see that kind of vibrancy and energy still being ploughed into this hobby that we all kind of love, really. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here talking about it on your show.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining me. It's been really great to chat, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for leading me down memory lane for a while and putting my rose-tinted spectacles back on for a while. But no, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Many, many thanks to Mike Mason for joining me to chat about his time at Games Workshop and his continuing career making amazing stuff for Call of Cthulhu. It was a real joy, so thanks, Mike. If you would like to support the work I do, researching, documenting, and interviewing the folks from the history of Games Workshop and Warhammer, then you can check out patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery. You'll get early and exclusive content, research articles, a little bonus conversation with Mike, very brief but fun, and lots of other exclusive material too. I am very grateful for all of the support I receive on Patreon as well as here on YouTube, so anything you can do to support, whether that's a like or a comment or sharing these videos, is hugely, hugely appreciated. Thank you once again to Mike. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.